Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Pine-Richland School District March 21st, 2022 regular board meeting. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, Ms. Williams.
Mr. DiTullio?
Here.
Mrs. Turchek?
Here.
Mr. Kashani?
Here.
Mrs. Brusalis? Mr. Cassidy?
Here.
Mrs. Hillman?
Here.
Mr. Lyons?
Here.
Dr. Mihalik?
Here.
And Dr. Meyer?
Here.
Thank you.
Before we move on, for information, the board met in executive session prior to this meeting to discuss matters of real estate and third-party personnel. Directly after this meeting, we will meet in executive session to discuss student matters and personnel matters. Move to item 1.02, recognition of visitors, which I understand there are none.
We do not have any.
Are there anyone in the audience that wishes to address the board? We will move to item 1.03, correspondence. Ms. Hathorn.
That would
I'm
be
sorry,
the-
Ms. Williams.
It's okay.
I was
Following
doing
people,
recognition.
the following people emailed the board regarding policy 832: Robin Tino, Sherry Berg, Christy Wees, Brittany Kinder, Christy Herrer, Amy Cray, Jennifer Busey regarding policy 832 related audit and open letter, Chris Bonneau regarding the health and safety plan, policies 903 and 832 and related audit and training, Ashley Fortier regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion and the related audit, Rebecca Hoffman regarding diversity, equity, inclusion, Dawn Augustine regarding 832 and related audit, Sarah Irwin regarding 832 and the related audit, Allison Duncan regarding equality versus equity, David Schapp regarding the AIU representative vote, John Corey regarding right to know information, Dina King regarding busing. The board received a letter from the Allegheny County Schools Health Insurance Consortium regarding its elected school board trustees.
Thank you. Item 1.04 are minutes for approval. Motion to approve the meeting minutes as attached.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item 1.02 is strategic plan update about the Board of Education onboarding program, and I will turn this over to Dr. Miller.
2.01.
2.01.
What did I say?
2.01, 2.02, whatever it takes.
Yeah, whatever
Is
it
that what
takes,
you're going to say next? Okay. So thank you. So we have this here for a couple of reasons. The first is it's one of the board goals. And so board professional development training has been a part of the strategic plan. And in this year, in particular, we have with new board members a specific onboarding requirement that's different than board members who go through the annual training process. So that's part of it. Another part of it's knowledge management. We utilize board docs in such a way that as we put items on our agenda, whether it's joint governance agenda items or combined meetings or planning meetings, voting meetings, they serve in the public and they're visible and transparent to all who'd like to see them. So, Mr. Stobener, if you could open the attachment. So I hope that our community has the opportunity to take a look at, this is just the semi-Cliff Notes version of this. So beginning before the oath, we had a willingness on a part of our newly elected members to come in for multiple meetings in order to begin getting background information and reading. Nothing of a confidential nature is shared at that time. It's all publicly available information. But there is a whole lot to read, learn, and understand around the operations of a $100 million public school district and all the regulatory requirements and other components that go with it. Plus, there's just the mechanics of this stuff, right? The meeting, the agendas, the technology, and being able to serve effectively, hopefully right from the get-go. When the oath is conducted then in early December and we begin to move through sort of more normal times, What we've done over the years, and this was based on feedback from prior transitions, is to spiral the content. So spend 60 minutes or so on a topic or topic areas, and then move to another topic and continue to sort of deepen and spiral. And again, a significant commitment. So thank you to Mrs. Brusalis, to Mrs. Turchik, to Mrs. Hillman, to Mr. Cassidy. They attended almost, if not every Tuesday, from early November through the end of February, and unless we had a meeting that week. And so those meetings they were in person sometimes, virtual sometimes. They ranged from 60 to 90 minutes, and the topics of discussion, are noted on the attachment. In addition to their commitment, and it wasn't just the 60 to 90 minutes that they provided at the meeting, but in almost all cases, there was some form of pre-reading or background information or videos or something in order to then make that time together as effective as possible. Current holdover board members participated in one or more, depending on content area. So we have board members who are assigned, if you will, as liaisons to certain topic areas. And so we had holdover board member participation. The senior team, I can't thank you enough, and Dr. Paxson as well, who joined Student Services. So they also attended relevant topics and were able to share information, answer questions. We feel really good about what is attached to this item. The board should feel really good about it because I'm not sure, I would love to see it if there is a more thoughtful, deliberate, comprehensive onboarding program that extends over a period of 3 months. If there is one in the United States, I'd love for somebody to send it. And it takes a whole lot of effort by a whole lot of people. And so I just wanted to raise that to the level of community awareness. And hopefully people, as they see these topics and ideas, begin to get a sense of sort of what you don't see and know that board members do. So I wanted to just pause for a second to the new members who went through the new onboarding training, which is it's not because they're new, it's because you're new. I mean, that is what it is. It's not a pejorative in any way. It's just the fact of the election. Any feedback, Mr. K, anybody that went through that?
I think it was good. One thing I think we did a response, and we do a survey at the end. One of the things I think would have been helpful, just to keep in, for future, was some of the procedures of doing all of this are a little tricky. So that would have been if we had spent a little time just going over making a motion and all that. I have the Robert rules, but reading it is not quite the same as kind of talking through it. So I think I put that in my survey that was one thing. But it was a lot of good information. And I also went to a thing at the IU, and I did learn a couple of new things, but a lot of it was just rehash what we had learned as well. So that was helpful.
That's excellent. Thank you.
So you want an hour and a half session with Dawn.
I want 10.
with Dawn to go
Actually,
over,
I was gonna
and
say-
he will just be absolutely.
I was going to say that would actually be
Sure,
with
Don,
you,
I'm up
Mr.
for it.
DiTullio. So that's a board. Yeah. Okay. That's good feedback, though. Thank you.
I have not filled out the survey form yet, but I wanted to thank the senior leadership team for spending the time taking the time to spend with us. It was very helpful.
Great. Thank
And
you.
they've always been available to answer questions, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I wanted to thank all the holdover board members. I mean, that was a lot of commitment of extra meetings, and we've had some long meetings, so it's been a lot of time commitment for everyone. So, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Cassidy.
Yeah, I just want to echo that as well. A lot of time commitment by everybody, and it is much appreciated.
Excellent. And I'm not sure if Mrs. Brusalis is on.
She is.
Okay. Mrs. Brusalis?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Any feedback that you'd like to share?
No, I think it's been covered, but thank you. It was very thorough, and I echo Amy's suggestion that some of the procedures would have been helpful coming in as new board members.
Okay. And that's great feedback. And then that's something, Mr. DiTullio, we can talk about because there are certain parts that fit within the onboarding that we would lead and then other parts that wouldn't be appropriate for us. So some of that is more the board's functioning itself, I think, is what we're hearing. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Items 3 is, or Section 3 is consent agenda. Item 3.01 is a motion to approve items 3.02 to 3.05.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion on any of these items? Seeing none, all those in favor? Yes?
Yes. Yes.
Opposed?
Yes.
Motion passes. I got to remember the delay on the phone. Section 4, Finance, Mr. Kashani.
Yes, sir. Item 4.01 is a motion to approve the financial reports dated January 31st, 2022, and accounts payable dated March 21st, 2022, in the amount of $189,082, and paid accounts for February, March, in the amount of $3,138,613.18 as listed.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? Motion passes.
Item 4.02, motion to approve the budget transfers in the amount of $173,859 as attached.
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Yes.
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 Opposed? Motion passes.
Item 4.03 is a motion to approve First National Bank as the primary depositor for financial services for the Pine-Richland School District following a formal request for proposal process.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion?
I will be abstaining from this vote because FNB, First National Bank, is my employer.
Noted. Is there any further discussion?
Just a question. Mark made the motion. Can you make a motion and then abstain?
I believe he can, because
Okay.
he's just putting it at issue.
Okay. Okay, just checking.
His abstention is clear and noted from the
Okay.
record.
Okay, thanks.
Good question.
Thank you, Matt. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Opposed?
Yes.
Abstentions?
Me?
Motion passes.
Item 4.04 is a motion to approve the engagement letter with Dinsmore Shoal LLP for bond counsel services associated with the Series 2015A swap termination and note modification as attached.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Yes. Opposed? Motion passes.
Item 4.05 is a motion to approve a resolution to terminate the swap and approve an interest rate management plan related to the district's general obligation note, Series 2015A.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion?
I just wanted to mention that the attachments, that will be updated after tomorrow, when I'll replace it, when the whole thing has both attachments to it, okay?
Noted. All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Item 4.06 is a motion to approve a resolution to modify the general obligation note, Series 2015A, as attached.
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion?
This is a good as place to pause as any with these series of motions. I just want to point out the work that's gone into this, and really the work that the district has done, the board, our finance director, the administration, to manage our finances to get to this point. It's easy for members of the public not to realize, but this is, I would say, what we've embarked on here the most significant restructuring of the district's finances, their debt certainly, in 10 or 12 years. To make these moves to de-risk our portfolio, to take advantage of our strong financial position. And this is what happens at meetings with just a few people here. No one's going to notice that. It's what we do. It's the work that's gone on for years. But I did want to point that out. This stuff matters a lot. We don't talk about it a lot. This matters a lot, and we don't get a lot of feedback on it, but this matters a lot. And so thank you to everyone for all that work that goes into this and for the thoughtfulness that allows us to explore our options and make what I think is a very good decision for current and future stakeholders in our district.
And to echo that, I think this isn't necessarily the only tool that's been used, but I believe, and Ms. Kirk, you can correct me if I'm wrong, when I started on the board, our debt service was hovering somewhere near 14%, and now we're in the 9-ish range. That's been a significant, this has had a significant impact on that. Not only refinancing the debt service or swapping or whatever we decided to do, but also shortening length as well. So we're taking care of the current and future commitments. And when we saw what we saw today and looking at the long-range outlook and some of those cash outlays that are going to be there, we can again take some of the financial things that we've done in the past and look at how can we map that out and be responsible now and also responsible for the future, because that 14% was not something that anybody on this board necessarily was a part of, but we had to handle it, and we did. So thank you to everyone on that. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Item 4.07 is a motion to authorize the solicitor to initiate real estate assessment appeals of all non-newly constructed properties within the Township of Pine and Richland Township transferred in 2021 where the taxes generated on the difference between the selling price and the assessed value would exceed $1,000.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? Motion passes.
Item 4.08 is a motion to approve the AIU policies, procedures, and use of funds for 2022-2023 as attached.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
I think she was on there. Opposed? Motion passes.
Item 4.09 is a motion to approve the 2022-2023 AIU Program of Services budget as attached.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Opposed? Motion passes.
And item 4.10 is an informational item that we have our next finance governance meeting on May 2nd. We'll be discussing the 2022-23 budget, the capital funding plan, and there's still a few series of bonds that we have to discuss. We're going to pick up where we left off on Series B of 2014 and Series of 2017.
Thank you, Mr. Kashani. Buildings and grounds, Dr. Mihalik.
Thank you. Item 5.01 is an information item. It's just listing that there were action items for buildings and grounds, including in the consent agenda from Section 3 above. And item 5.02 is an information item that there will be a motion at the April 4th planning meeting to approve the purchase of replacement carpeting for portions of Wexford, Richland, and Eden Hall Upper Elementary and the high school. And the amount will be filled in when we have that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mihalik. Academic achievement, Dr. Meyer.
Item 6.01 is an information item. It is the 30-day display for advanced placement AP English resources. Dr. P, do you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you. So this kind of brings the evaluation process a little bit closer to a close. We just ended last week. We had our resources available for virtual evaluation by staff members, community members, and students. We did have a nice group of students participate. I think there was some prompting from their AP English teachers to participate, but we still value student voice, especially students that are in the course at the time. So at this point of the evaluation, we turn it over again to the community to review. So for the next 30 days, hard copies are on display in the high school library and also at Richland Library. And tomorrow, we'll be sending out a communication again. If people cannot make it to one of those places to see the hard copies, there's electronic copies to review as well. And then the plan from there, we'll be negotiating cost with the company over the next 30 days. And then in May, formal request for approval for purchase. Right after purchase happens, we start planning for professional development for the staff. Hopefully you had a chance to read the executive summary, which breaks down the entire evaluation process from start to finish. A lot of different people involved within the English department, but not just the English department. GATE teachers, social studies teachers. That comes out of our in-depth program review with recommendations of having that cross-content area. Science teacher, that we brought a science teacher in for that, and he has some experience with one of the platforms that the students and teachers will be using. So just next step, that was for an informational item where we go with the evaluation for the AP English 11 and 12.
Any other discussion on this point?
I have a question. And forgive me for not knowing this answer already, but if people wanted to come in, I see that there's an extra 30-day evaluation period. If people wanted to come in, what is the procedure for that? Do they come in during school hours? Is it after hours? What do people do if they want to review the items?
So Richland Library is one option, so they don't have to come into the school, so they can go to Richland Library to see the actual hard copies. Again, we're sending virtual, so they don't even have to physically to come in. They can do it online. But if they don't have the resources or if their preference is to touch and feel, our library here at the school is open after hours. That is our preference. But if someone, the only time that they could come in would be during the school day, we could accommodate that.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion?
I was just going to say, I hope everybody took the time to look at the information provided by Dr. Justice and Dr. Pasquinelli about our robust AP curriculum and how much our students benefit from having access to those courses. It is definitely an asset to our district and to our students. So thank you, guys, for putting all the work into this.
Personally, I appreciate the evolution of how we're looking at the curriculum and how we're looking at the resources. 20 years ago, there wasn't the component of technology integration. So, and I can see that continuing to evolve and maybe at a speedier pace than maybe we were replacing books in the past. But I do appreciate how that has evolved and how the staff has met that evolution and put the thoughtfulness together. So, and I'm surprised to see that we don't have the electronic page flip this time, but we do always appreciate that, Dr. Pasquale.
Yeah, it's coming soon. I think that's a good point, though, Greg. Kids still want a hard copy book. I mean, they want to turn a page, and when we do get to the point of making a recommendation for purchase, we purchase the textbooks, one for every child, and the online resources typically come with that. Online makes it more convenient if you're out and about, if you're on the way to a game or practice or, out with your family, you can get to it without having the hard copy, but having that physical copy to turn a page, and really when you get into the depths of understanding that we want, especially with a course like AP Lit and AP Lang, kids appreciate having that textbook to turn. So we'll have both for them if that's approved.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Meyer. Any further? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Meyer. Student Services, Mrs. Hillman.
Agenda item 7.01, student service action item is in the consent agenda. That was item 3.0.
Thank you, Mrs. Hillman.
I
Staff
can't
service-
hear
Oh.
Mrs. Hillman.
I'm sorry, I didn't have my microphone on.
Oh. Everything was in consent agenda, Ms. Brasalis,
Correct.
is the summary of student services. Staff services, Mr. Cassidy.
8.01 is a motion item to approve the PRESPA volunteer personnel as attached.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Yes.
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 Opposed? Motion passes.
8.02 is a discussion information item. The board will take a closer look at policies 903, public participation in board meetings, and policy 915, booster and parent organizations. The March 7, 2022 board planning meeting, individual board members requested that policies 903 and 915 be pulled from the 900 batch policy review for further discussion.
Yeah, so I had suggested we put these on here to have some of that discussion right now. If they remain pulled from the batch, one or both, no problem. But if after discussion of, reasonable length, they can be reinserted into the batch, great. So it's just based on the substance nature of the discussion.
Anyone want to kick off thoughts on either one?
Why don't we go with the low-hanging fruit, the easier one, go
The
right to the
915.
booster policy,
Yep, that's
which maybe can come back in. And so the reason I had asked it to be pulled, and the reason was that this policy and how the district relates and how some of our supplemental employees relate to boosters has come up this year. I thought it relevant to bring that policy forward for discussion, maybe to highlight some elements around that policy and talk about some of the reasons. At its highest level, I think one of the things behind this policy, was there were some immediate triggers, which is around small games of chance licensing, to be honest. And so we had to do more official recognition. At that time, though, we also knew that we had the ability to provide something back to our boosters, namely in the form of the umbrella insurance policy, which is referenced in the policy. So it was a little, we'll have a little carrot, and we'll actually get a little more accountability from the boosters, and you can see the list of requirements the boosters have to provide, list of officers, their financials, some things along that line. If there is one item, well, there is one item in there as well that's worth highlighting, always bears repeating, which is the concept that participating in a booster group can never be a condition for participating in one of our fully funded sports. And so that's also very important, and we wanted to ensure that that message was consistently delivered. There's probably one item that's not in this policy, but I think was a big topic of discussion that I wanted to bring out, which was we also wanted to bring a framework around our booster groups to avoid competing for the same donors, over-competing for the same donors, donor fatigue, because many of the same small businesses and same families are providing support to these booster groups. And so that was a conscious effort. As Dr. Pasquinelli usually describes it, this is these booster groups are intended to provide the icing, not the cake, not the substance of that participation, but maybe it's a nicer uniform. Maybe it's an extra bit of apparel that we wouldn't otherwise include. Maybe it's pizza after game. Maybe it's even a trip that we wouldn't otherwise include. These ideas were all part of why we formed this policy. What becomes interesting is around enforcement. So when a booster group isn't meeting those expectations, you can find there's very few levers to pull here. There's really just one, which is, well, we're not going to recognize you, which is a bit of the nuclear option, if you will. So I highlight that as an area, policy never can really capture these nuanced discussions that happen with the administration, with the athletic director, with the coaches, who also have a responsibility to work with that booster group to ensure they're aligned with all these things that were laid out that stand behind the reasoning for this policy. And that policy is appropriately set by the board. So I know there was some question about that from new board members during our training, in other words. So I wanted to bring that up and see if there were questions that we could answer also in public, in deliberations, and even possibly if there was some motions to, make changes to that policy. And Christine, I know I'm thinking of you in particular. I'm not sure when and where over some of those training meetings or other meetings, but I think you had some questions about how we interact with the boosters and how the administration interacts with them.
Yes, but I don't remember what my specific questions were now.
I will say, because I've been involved in a lot of different booster groups, my kids played multiple sports, and I coached for a while. I've always found it concerning that each booster group runs differently, how they collect money, whether there's fundraising. And I know it is supposed to be the icing on the cake, but that's not true for a lot of sports. Like a lot of sports, it's the whole cake plus something on the side, where you have parents who are booking turf rental space, and they're organizing stuff through off season, and they're conditioning and things like that. So I agree that this is something that we need to look at. It just is very difficult sport by sport, where you have some coaches who are, they're completely involved, they take care of their sport, and the parents and the boosters are the icing on the cake. But then you have other ones that are not. And if you didn't have those parents groups, it would really be not a great situation for the kids, how everything shook out.
Yeah, I'll add, so when we reviewed this policy to bring it forward, feel like the policy has what it needs in terms of the topics that typically come up with our booster groups. The challenge is turnover all the time. Obviously, you get that with a booster group. We feel like we've got a nice cadence of support for them now. Like now we have annual booster leadership meetings, and we go through this entire policy, and we encourage the website because it has everything. There's awesome guidance there for new people that are coming into these positions that are volunteering their time that we greatly appreciate. We're also doing things like an academy for our coaches that we hadn't done before to help them understand, because it's challenging to help work with and to some degree manage a booster group to say this is what we need versus run with it, because again, parents always want what's best for their kids, and it becomes a challenge for parents to say no, because the last group did this, and then it keeps this, it gets higher and higher and higher. So we there are always outliers that in at times we've had to step in to support. Dana comes in to support in different ways. Brian comes in to support in different ways, obviously our AD, and we work closely with them when we're hearing about challenges that are occurring within that particular organization. But everything Peter mentioned is true and accurate. It's what guided this policy in the first place, but feel as though we've got the information necessary to support our booster groups. We can continue to get better at the implementation in terms of the guidance that we provide and the support we provide our coaches. We have things now, we have a podcast there, so if you can't make the meeting or if you missed it or you want to it's sitting out there. We have an acknowledgement form that basically says, I listened, I understand, I have questions, I know who to go to. We've improved the fundraising process in terms of a turnaround. That was a concern our booster group shared with us in the past, of acknowledging you received it, has it been approved, and any feedback you have for us to make that work. That's in place. So everything across the board, from concession stands to ticketing, it's all there, and that guidance there, and the support with the website. So feel like we've got what we need in the policy. We can always look at ways that we can better support our booster groups, and then there's always those case by cases Amy mentioned that we want to step in and support further.
Yeah, just a couple of things to add. So everything works best in an organization like ours when the people closest to the issue are the ones who are doing the most work. So, for example, a head coach who's a program manager, varsity head coach, when they do an end-of-the-year evaluation of their equipment, uniforms, resources, et cetera, when they submit that and have honest discussion with the athletic director then understands, the condition, the needs for each particular sport. He or she can then weigh the needs across all of those sports, understand what the financial impacts are, then adjust an annual budget to reflect a prioritization of needs and how that all fits. We talk about a lot of things, right? And when we start to get to some of the specific equipment needs, we're getting down to a very small sliver of the overall expenditures that exist for the district. And so if that communication is happening well, if the athletic director is able to weigh and look across and make reasoned decisions and recommendations, when there are safety concerns or needs, then the district is acting absolutely. When they are, it would be nice to have, but we don't have to have, those are decisions, right? I mean, those are decisions that no one wants to say no, but you also have to balance competing interests in an organization and understand what the role of different activities are relative to the mission and where that fits. These are tough things. And I think the challenge sometimes, as we have worked with booster groups, and we're super appreciative of the support, it should be support to, not direction of. And that's listed right here in the board policy, right? It's providing support, but it's not running the program. It's providing support. And a lot of the real discussions are around setting expectations. If a shirt's it's nice to have a piece of gear that says Pine-Richland X, whatever, not cross-country, just I'm using X as a variable in an algebraic example. Pine-Richland X. You can get that Pine-Richland X for $20 shirt, or you can get a $65 same shirt that has moisture wicking capabilities that if you even think about sweating, it's automatically sucked off your skin and gone, right? There's a big difference there when we extrapolate that. If there's an end of the season get-together to celebrate the accomplishments of the kids, there's a big difference between $40 a plate and $12 a plate in terms of what happens. And all of that stuff becomes a part of the managing those competing interests. And again, some is district, some is not district, but if we can get the right people talking and allow it to work through the system, it works well. If they're capital expenditures, then Mr. Zimmerman's involved and it goes into that capital funding budget.
Personally, I'm fine with the,
$20. Is that what you're going to say?
well, $19.99, I think you can get a deal. I'm personally fine with the language in 915. One of my concerns always with this policy is the difference between funded, partially funded, and non-funded sports. And with that, I think this comes more to the execution. I think the meat's in here, but it's and the reason I say that is with partially funded and club sports or club activities, if you will, there tends to be more of a separation between someone in administration or oversight and what's going on. So when the booster organization becomes that oversight, and I think this is kind of what Amy was sort of starting to speak into, is when the club themselves becomes the oversight, that's where we just may need maybe some tightening up of a learning curve. And I know that compared to the way it used to be, we're way better. I know through this process we've gotten better. So, but as the policy itself is written, I like the way it's written, and I personally don't see a need for any changes. And I would be comfortable with it going back into the group.
I'll tell you where we're proud is the partially funded sports, those booster leaders or club leaders, they participate in these, which again, technically wouldn't have to now, then if they're going to be approved through our board agreement, then that's a different thing. But coaches, same things. They are participating in these coaches groups, and we don't hire those coaches. We're not evaluating those coaches, but they are still participating in what we have shared, our AD shares in terms of best practices for managing a program, which is a really positive thing. There's a good relationship there, but yeah, always opportunities to tighten more and better understand what the needs are. That's wonderful, and we can do that.
So okay with putting this into the batch? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
I think we can add 9:15 back in. Okay, that was the easy discussion. 9:03, I think, is a little bit more in depth, and we can start a discussion now, but really what I think is we should look at pulling the staff services and having a more detailed discussion about it, but that opinion, I don't know if everyone else is feeling the same way, if they think there needs to be change or not. But based on some recent meetings, I would say that this probably deserves some depth of discussion. But anyone else?
Well, I don't know how deep we need to go, but I thought maybe we could scratch the surface a little, and then we could see. And I'll try not to break a sweat talking while this heat is just pouring on us. Yeah. Is Mr. Zimmerman,
quickly
playing around with
exited
it somewhere? Yeah.
It was supposed to be the demonstration at the joint governance meeting.
Yeah.
It's a little late.
It's a little late. So, some things that stood out to me as I reread this a couple times, and in thinking about the past few meetings where this was a topic of conversation, stood out taxpayers. So these are for residents and taxpayers primarily. There's some other opportunity given to groups that are stakeholders, but predominantly residents. And so that, to me, would mean that that particular resident payer would be the one speaking, or if they can't be here, get speaker to speak on their behalf, which is, again, as long as a resident or a taxpayer whose words are being expressed, that be in the spirit of the policy. I brought up something on March 7th that just better state tonight and maybe offer some more clarity about what I meant. We had people who were residents and taxpayers, the words of people who weren't, on March 7th. And it was done actually after we decided as a board, allow the people in the room to say those words. So it seemed that the fact that it's almost like it was being done out of spite in direct opposition to what we decided. So I want to avoid that. And that was really the spirit of me suggesting we look at this. If we have people who don't fit the definition of whatever our policy, if we want to change that, we can change that. But if we have a definition of who to speak, then we should honor that, enforce that. And if I was the only one kind of taken back by that, then that's fine. It was just me. But it just seemed weird. So.
May I? So now our policy says who can speak. It says about what they can say. Except that it has to do, if it's spoken prior to the meeting, it has to relate to what's on the agenda. We haven't limited it to that. We let people speak. I remember PSBA did said something about it cautioned boards to always on the side of allowing more people to speak, because this is First Amendment, right? It's very touchy. So I think we get into very dangerous water if we start telling people what they're to say. Because in some cases, you could get poetry. And as a government, it is very dangerous to tell them, no, you cannot get up and read poetry. So I personally do not want to wade into first rights, because I think it could end up costing the district some money.
Just to build off of that, you know, you people can speak and cite a columnist who for a newspaper. They're not residents. You know, it's easy to cite or read their words if it's informative for debate and discussion. So the other thing is, this policy are guidelines. They're not, this is not like some law that becomes exclusionary by definition because it exists. We as a board decide, particularly the board president has a lot of leeway and makes decisions about how to enforce this. And we as a board have even more leeway going beyond if we think our interest. So, you know, this, what happened in prior meetings, you know, I think it's reasonable to have an opinion about what matters and doesn't, and board members can talk about that. And, you know, it's not meant to be perverse or somehow, you know, weird or anything like that. It's because there are genuine differences in opinion, and that's at the heart of what the First Amendment is.
Well, so I just wanted to bring that up as something that we could talk about, because, again, if it was just me, it was just me, and so be it. It just seems like it could be abused. I think we need to think about that. There is this, I mean, you'd have to help me with the legal description, but it's not like there's, this isn't exactly, you used the word in your letter to us, limited public forum. So we do have some discretion.
You do have some discretion. It's a limited public forum. First Amendment rights apply, but the board is permitted to adopt content-based or subject matter reasons, provided they are reasonable and that they're not viewed specific.
Okay.
But the First Amendment, it is so hard. I could try to write you a policy, and I could probably go 15 pages, and you probably, the next person that came up and question or wrinkle is difficult to work through. Really requires the exercise of judgment. I understand what you're saying, Mark, about somebody else's letter, and that is odd or awkward. I would really tread extremely carefully with starting to inquire as to people's source when they're speaking, because people do go to sources to help them get their thoughts together. They quote other people, and to me, an area that's just asking for problems for us. I understand your comment.
This could, maybe
It's
this
awkward.
would be, if we want to go deeper, that would be for another, I wanted to raise this at least. The other thing, and boy, I wish I would have saw this 10 years ago. The total portion of the meeting which the public is invited to speak, the total portion, the end,
Yes.
is 60 minutes.
Right.
Yeah, and I do
Not
think we
60
need,
minutes at each.
yeah,
And-
we need
and-
to probably
And,
enforce that.
and,
because
and
it's
that has
kind
been
of out
discussed,
there.
are we comfortable with, which, you know, for us to do our business as a board, which is what these meetings are for, I think that's appropriate. One thing that I think that could help avoid a situation like we saw at that March 7th meeting would be to prioritize, you know, residents and taxpayers, and provided time allotment, then allow some of those other speakers, if you will, i.e. then they would get a chance to say their own words. So if we had, you know, 20 residents signed up, and you're not a resident, you know, it's kind of, those are the folks that are, this is just a suggestion for some language that could be added that says, you know, we're taking the priority goes to our residents, which is what the law requires. And anyone else that would wish to speak, time provided, they're kind of at the back end of that. Again, legality-wise, I think we'd be okay there, giving our residents the chance and then opening it up. But just a thought there.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I probably do that, but I think we have to be careful. You know, that hour limit, remember the idea being we have public business that we have to get to. And so we want to force time rules like the 3-minute per speaker rule, because we have business we need to want to provide the greatest opportunity for people to speak. Even our rule, we'd want to be careful about that. If we have one agenda item, when do we ever have that? But if we did, that may be an evening where we would say we're going to allow additional time for if there is interest to provide comment, because we're sure the public has an opportunity to comment. So you're kind of using your best judgment to get the public business done, but make sure that citizens have the ability to comment. You can also defer public comment to the next meeting. That's appropriate to do if time gets consumed.
I'm good with the policy as is. If the last meeting, you said, you know what, let's have the residents speak, then you guys can speak, we all would have said, great. Good meeting. I see there's 30 of you here. Are you all here from that new plan? Can one of you get up and just speak? Just one of you. They get out of there in 20 minutes, public comment. It's not me. These questions have come up exceedingly. The 1 hour limit comes up. We can see it coming. You will have those conversations with leadership. What do we do? When do we do it? Are you time, Barb? Hey, I'm not going to be strict on the hour, but if we get to an hour, I'm going to send an hour. How many more people do we have? That's how we've done it. That's how we've handled it. Not surprisingly, not everyone's been pleased every time with those. But sitting here and spending hours on crafting cover eventualities that have come up incredibly infrequently in my 12 years, not an interesting exercise or an effective use of our time, I don't think.
And we need to tread lightly. Everyone knows I moved, and I've been to contentious board meetings and and parents and taxpayers have always been given time above and beyond an hour. So I don't know how that would look to our public if we don't do it regularly. It's able to seem like we're picking and choosing topics. It could come across.
In that case, by the way, I'd be in favor of it more strictly.
Right.
As I will say, the 3-minute limit historically was not.
Ish.
Yeah. And I think it's improved.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the time limit, again, it's in our policy. I think the possibility, especially when we have a lot of things to cover, we've got a lot of administrators that we need to hear from. We as elected members, we're here for the duration. I know Dr. Mill isn't going to tap out, but I also wouldn't be opposed to, set the beginning of, hey, we're going to give 30 minutes at the beginning and we're going to open it up at the end, kind of open-ended. We're here and everyone can speak, but there's some flexibilities that just in the time limit, I think it says a total time of 60 minutes. I would be more comfortable with that if we see a big meeting coming up. It allows those leaders to do their business and get out. It's us that they speak with. I think that's in the policy. So, because it just says a total time, we can use that as discretion. Board leadership can talk about that as we come up to meetings. Again, it's not there. So my question is everyone comfortable or most of them comfortable with moving this back into the batch as is, or do you have, I'm sorry, Ms. Brasalis?
Yeah, so I have another issue, personally directed comments. I feel like historically this has been very subjective. We have welcomed people to speak if they are saying something positive about members or administrators, but we have discouraged it when it is negative. I feel like there is something very fundamental about being able to call out your publics at a public forum, and also, the sensitivity of our enforcement of this rule, I think, may on trying to censor some, negative comments. Again, we welcome positive things to be said about the people sitting. Well, I'm not there with you tonight, but sitting there, elected members, and also the administration. So I feel like it's so subjective that needs to be removed, that it's comment good or bad. And because we don't apply it in an even-handed manner, I think we should take it out of our policy.
So your suggestion would be just to remove it completely and leave the subjectiveness out of it?
Yeah, I take out anything that says personally directed.
So that whole sentence, all statements shall be directed to the participant, or no participant may address or question school directors individually?
She's talking about later in policy.
I don't know, that might be one for Mr. Palmer, but there is the line, hold on, let me look at it. I have to forth with my screens here.
It's on the top of the second page is what you're looking, Christina.
Okay,
Oh, wait a minute.
No.
Yeah, the bottom of towards the bottom of the second page, it says the presiding officer
may interrupt,
or
yes.
terminate a participant's statement when the person, or when the statement's too lengthy, personally directed, abusive, or irrelevant. I think that's what you were pointing to.
Right, like we can length of something because that's a subjective measure,
Right.
but personally directed we have welcomed people to praise our board members and leadership team, but we have discouraged the opposite. So I feel like it's such a subjective thing that personal line should be taken out.
I'm not at every one of your meetings that I am at. I'm not aware of us prohibiting comment that is critical of a board member or an administrator. That's really at the heart of the First Amendment. But we certainly could prohibit, for example, a statement that is personally directed at a member regarding a personal relationship of the board member that does not relate to school business, or commenting on the of a board member that doesn't relate to school business.
See, I
So
think the
it's a judgment call, but we would never, it would be categorically improper to say we will receive only positive comment and not negative. That would,
Right, but in
that would be a problem.
practice, I believe it hasn't when it has been used.
No, actually, Christina, I'm going to ask you to specifically that, because one thing that happens all too often on Facebook, in this room, in this community, is someone gets an idea, someone posts it, someone makes that argument, and that idea gets legs, it gets repeated. I'm presiding officer. I've stopped peers on 2 occasions. One was, I've seen it done. The solicitor stopped a speaker for fear that a confidential student disciplinary matter would be revealed and a student identified. Once it was determined that that wasn't in place, a videotape shows me telling the solicitor speaker continue. Now, John Corey and Mr. Baxter can get up and you can otherwise, but I know what the videotape shows. So,
But it was not about it was naming an administrator when
was
she
the speaker allowed to
retelling the
continue?
story. Let me speak.
Right. So,
Retelling
Christina.
the story on who she reported things to, she named an administrator. And it was because she named the administrator that she was interrupted.
Christina, and the main thing here is,
I was there. That's
Christina,
what
so
happened.
was I. The main thing here is, these are tough situations, emotional moments. Greg, that's a hot seat. You're sitting in it. If it takes 10 or 15 seconds of reflection to get that call right, I'm okay with that. What the assertion is made was that we got the call totally wrong. And now that story's changed. That's not going to be posted on Facebook. You're not going to post that on Twitter. But you've just changed the story there. Now, there was a caller.
She said an administrator's name. Student's name, not anyone else's name. It was the administrator's name.
And the caller was allowed, the speaker was allowed to
Eventually,
continue.
but it was a very contentious moment because that particular line
And who
was cited.
asked the solicitor to allow the speaker to continue for the
Well,
record?
that may have been you after much contentious talk. However, the initial interview
It was just a quiet aside with the solicitor, so it was me. So I just want to be clear, this is the exact opposite of what I just heard. I mean, this is a complete 180, what you were saying in very general terms.
No, it's not.
When
a
we
180,
get to
because she was
specifics.
an administrator, not a student. She was reporting her facts as she knew them.
I
think
just don't
from
see
point-
what happened.
From the standpoint of the policy, I think what we got to figure out is allow directly, comments to be made directly to members. I think as elected officials, as long as they don't get into the obscenity, and that's one thing I won't take out of here. If somebody just wants to come out and scream obscenities, or state obscenities, that's one that cannot be allowed. Someone's going to name another student and accuse them of something. That is something that, as a board, we allow. If individuals want to come up and tell me that they don't like me in a number of various fashions, as long as it's not obscene, I personally am okay with that. I think we,
Can we
yeah.
be honest? Who in this district, board meetings, thinks that you can't stand up and criticize me and Miller and this whole administration? I mean,
So the question is,
were you there?
do we,
You know, seriously, I just want to ask, because it's being asserted that somehow that can't have district by Christina. And I'm going, where is the evidence for that?
but the question is,
Well, through a year of those
It's
meetings.
it's very subjective in the way we enforce it. Same moment, someone said something nice about someone on our staff.
But there's no evidence of it being
Someone was
enforced.
telling something.
But there's no evidence of it being
that might have
enforced
been
at all.
negative, that was disallowed. And I say
Christina, but
take
it's
it out.
not been
the
enforced
question
at
is,
all.
do we need to remove,
Area.
or do we leave it up for a gray area and interpretation?
Well,
So that is,
here's the question, but I see it just slightly different, Greg. So the question for us, is there value in giving our presiding officer, no matter who that is, whenever it is, power to control the situation when something crossed that line personally directed at the board member? I think there's value in giving an officer that control. So therefore,
and
I
it's in
think
here, and it's in here,
so
and
that's
so
the
I
key.
think,
Yeah.
I think we can be okay. We can criticize a specific, right? And we can talk about that, and we can learn from it, and be perfect. But I think without that, I would still, if somebody's going to yell and attack somebody from an obscene standpoint. So I mean, again, I think as a presiding officer, as a former presiding officer, having that leeway. Again, maybe we can talk about enforcement of that at some of our board about that, but I think that we can work with the policy as is, as long as everyone's comfortable with understanding that there's gray here. This is not a cut and dry, and in a lot of cases, me lean over when a speaker's going, and Peter's done it in the past, because who's going to protect us from the standpoint of the law is to our right. So.
The other thing I would add, Mark, to your comment is, remember the policy said that the ruling of the presiding officer is subject of the board. So there's a basis for boards, if the majority disagrees with the ruling of the presiding officer, that can be undone.
That's a good point. So we could overturn it with a simple majority, right? A simple majority.
Yeah, those,
Thank you, Dawn.
Yeah, so first comment, this is the discussion of the board. Like, this is exactly happening at a public board meeting, which is to discuss policy, and in this case, the implementation policy. So what I heard Don say was he could write a 15-page policy. It's still going to have the requirement of discernment on behalf of the presider. There's no way around that. Each of those words that's in that one sentence is abusive. Where do you draw that line? And what I've understood over 26 years is that our response is to listen, to be inclusive far more than exclusive or silencing. So we listen. The place where the board and nation can struggle during public comment is if something is factually and we listen and we do not respond. That's in the policy as well. Not engaging with speakers. That does not work well, in good times or in tough times. It leads to a back and forth that ultimately tends to make the orderly operation of the board less effective. If we have opportunities for two-way dialogue, we need to, I think, consider other mechanisms, whether those governance meetings with more time allocated, or they are session meetings or town halls or other opportunities to do that. I can say we have recording meetings, and for 9 years, there have been commendations, been criticisms. Some of those criticisms that have been directed at members of the leadership team have been pointed. They have been at times harsh, and we listen, and we try to listen and understand and reflect on the words that are being spoken. If we, and for 9 years, if I feel something is being said that is appropriate to respond to at the appropriate time, then I'll say something to the presiding, and we will work through that. But I appreciate the discussion. I don't think there's a lot of change needed in the policy language itself. The policy, it's just not easy. It can be fine as a policy, but not easy to implement. And that's where the discretion of the presiding officer just has to be implemented. By the way, the clock, as simple as a clock is, that's been hugely helpful. The 3-minute clock, I mean, because then it's there, you can see it, the reminders, etc. Again, personally comments, if they're personally directed comments about the business of the district, one thing. If somebody starts making personally directed comments about the presiding officer, and let's say your family, which has nothing to do with the operation of the school district or the business in front of the board, imagine that spot. The person with the discretion is the subject of the, right? So those are tough moments, and they can happen. And so generally, those have been listened to more than not. And again, think of more than a couple of occasions in 9 years where some didn't get the opportunity to speak. I just can't remember.
Do we batch this up?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I think
believe.
so.
Is everyone comfortable?
Yeah.
Yeah. I do want to say that the one thing in the clock has been great, and I would like to thank.
Stovner.
I would like to thank, well, Mr. Stovner. I would like to thank the public as well, because reminders have been made that you're coming in on time. We have been, as a generally, very good at that. So I do appreciate that, especially when we do have those long meetings. It allows us to get to the board business, and allows everyone to speak. I will do think that actually, again, whether you agree or disagree with the outcome, we started this at the last meeting, and it was consensus of the board. Well, it was a majority of the board that said this is the direction we're going to go on speakers. That was kind of this policy working. Whether you agree with it or not, I do think it gives us the leeway so I'm comfortable batching it, and I see consensus that we're comfortable batching. Okay. Let's move that on into the consent. So those are both going to, am I correct, Ms. Williams, as she works her magic on board docs?
We should probably do a motion to amend the motion to include 1, 3, and 9.
I don't think we've made a motion yet. So whoever makes that motion could verbally read what's there, but instead of saying as attached, could add including policy 903 and policy 915.
Mr. Cassie got it. He's got it.
It's all you pressure.
Item 8.03, motion to approve reading of batch policies 900, community, including 903 and 915.
Second.
Has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the batch policies? Right. I'd like to thank everyone. I know this is the first time many of the new board members have gone through this. I will say is a much less painful time than the first time we went through these batches. So a lot less corrections to be made and red lines, and I don't know if everyone appreciates, this is another one of those that I don't think people necessarily appreciate what was done. When those were hit the last time, it had been decades, I believe, and what your routine right now. So thank you, everyone. Seeing no further discussion, all those are?
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? Motion passes.
8.04 is an information item for board consideration, April planning meeting. Motion to approve the first reading of batch policies 800 as attached.
Second.
The motion has been made.
Information item.
I'm sorry,
Just
information
information.
today,
Yeah,
yep.
yeah.
Yes?
So this will be April planning meeting, the motion.
On that second button.
But we're ready now, though.
All right.
This is information
Yep.
only, and this is Brusels, who's a part of a pre-work on this. We're actually getting 100s forward relatively soon as well. Mrs. Hillman will be a part of that later this week with SLT members. I just wanted, the only one listed that I wanted in, that's pulled from the batch is 800s, or 800 records management. It's not so much because of the policy as it is the AR. The B is, again, not likely a big deal, but just because we believe these two should come together, AR and policy, and let us have our head and mind on. Summer would be a better time for us to really be able to look at this and give it the attention it needs without action of operation. So that's why the 800s listed is pulled.
8.05 is a discussion. The board will discuss the role of volunteer coach as it relates to births.
And just to kick this off, this discussion revolves around something that we've kind of dabbled in before, but not kind of, at least not in my time on the board, where we have board member volunteers within the district, and some of us have served in many various volunteer roles, whether, some of the board members have volunteered with various groups like Prof. I know myself and Peter, and there may be others that while on the board have served on a booster group as well. So there have been a number of times where board members have been volunteers. This is just, drawing attention to something that we have this year. A couple board members are going to be volunteering or have asked to volunteer as to some representative sports, and just wanted to start a discussion around that. I don't know if those volunteers or those board members want to speak about, what their path. I think in general it's something that we just need to hash out to understand that this is going to happen. Nations there can be, but they are volunteers. So.
Well, yeah, I know, do Amy?
I'll go first. So I have been coaching field hockey. I was with the team for 2 years, and this past fall with the middle school team, and I would like to I was a paid employee, a supplemental employee, but I would like to continue as a volunteer. I am fortunate because I am not so young to run around with middle schoolers that last year my assistant coach, she's going to flip to be the head coach. And so it was really kind of administrative. I help out a lot with making sure we have forms in and emailing parents. Middle schoolers need a lot of hand-holding, and I would like to continue to do that. I was with the high school program previously, so it's a good way for our program to transition into the high school program, that we're all on the same page. For Donna, Steve, varsity coach. So that is, I'm hoping to do it. A volunteer, I know actually I have a vacation scheduled in the middle of it, so I won't be there the whole time. We're hoping to find another, since I would be a volunteer, could have a head coach, hopefully, I think, to find an assistant coach. When I got involved in this about 4 years ago, we're really struggling to find coaches, and that is an issue, and probably Mr. Glickman can speak to it. It is kind of tricky to find coaches for sports, so that's where.
So, and I'm happy to share the opportunity itself to me. Before I even go there, though, I wanted to first and foremost, is there a policy that says we can't? Would make it very clear. So and Dawn, please correct me if I've missed something, but at least from a policy standpoint, it's permitted. We have policy on membership, policy 4, that does get into qualifications of a school director. And one of those qualifications says, shall not be engaged in a business transaction with the employed by the school district or receive pay for services from the school district. Does not mention volunteers. And policy 916, which policy on volunteers, specifically says if there was any vagueness about the definition of a volunteer, it says a volunteer is not a school employee. So at least there seems to be a clear pathway for this to be possible, and that that's just one little hurdle to clear. And there has to be, we talk about wearing hats, and there has to be some discipline around. It won't be perfect, but just respect for what you might be wearing at any given time. So did I miss something on the policy side, Dawn? Is there something that would prevent this?
No, the provision you read about business transactions, that's straight out of the school code. And I had already opined that that does not apply to volunteers.
Okay, thank you. As far as my own opportunity, I had not known, even spoken with Coach LaDon until the night we interviewed him. I really liked what he had to say. Since we hired him, I saw what he was doing with the community and the football parents, and I just really liked it. He seemed to be doing a lot of the right things and saying a lot of the right things. So I was intrigued by that. So I wanted to just, have, which we did, and I learned that at Penn Hills, he brought up there called Coaching Boys to Men. So in addition to his program responsibility and rental program on the field, he also had a part off the field about building character. So he mentioned that to me, that he viewed development as implicit to what he does as a head coach and running a program. That's an area of interest of mine. He expressed that, it's sort of it's a part job when you're the head coach. So to take it to the next level with someone who has a heart for it, I do it as a ministry, just sort of like working with folks at my day jobs. I help folks through with the life coaching kind of a practice side, so it very much is in harmony with where my heart is. So I have an opportunity to be a football assistant, not a position, not on the field, off the field. It's more about development and culture, and really being Coach LaDon's special assistant to help him build program out off the field. And I would very much, I'm prepared to make a decision if I have to. The other, I would like to be able to do both.
Thank you. Any other discussion, comments, questions?
One of the things that's has weighed on my mind, I've purposely gone in to read, to my class, or I've gone in to speak at career fair when there's other parents there speaking at career fair. But I very purposefully tried to avoid what might be perceived as a conflict. We talk about hats, but when we do the training, Miller, he always says, you are wearing your board hat. And so I'm really concerned that there's going to be blurred lines. I don't go to band boosters meetings because I don't want being. When Denise Lane stopped being the chair for the orchestra boosters, I thought about getting involved, and I decided not to, because where we are school directors, and that weighs. Can the coach freely say something? who does the coach communicate to? Coach communicate to Mark? We've had issues, chain of communication in football. I'm really concerned that this is, while not a policy issue, is a conflict of interest.
We had issues in the past with board members volunteering in different positions. A conflict of interest came up.
I can only speak to my personal, so I'll turn that over to Dr. Miller.
So what I would say is case by case. So through the example of to a primary building and being a classroom reader, it would be Dan, or being one of many parent chaperone to an event, right? So that's, people call volunteer different things. So we've not had a circumstance, and we can't, where I'll use the Mrs. Turchik example because it's sort of, it can be as more concrete. She was a supplemental contract holder, which meant she had a fixed position. She was board approved. She was responsible for work head coach, but she had her own team and program within that same vision. She would help run tryouts. She would select teams. She would make planning decisions, et cetera, et cetera. So those are that a coach does, whether they're a middle school coach or a JV coach or a varsity coach or whatever. Ultimately, that coach is evaluated by the head coach of the program with oversight from the athletic director, and there is a supervisory sort of. If there's a problem on that team, and I'm not aware of any problems that were on that team, but if a problem on a team, we can't foresee that, then the question becomes, how does that work? So is the head coach, if that person were a board member, likely to provide critical feedback, an honest evaluation, report that through the chain of command? Does it have an effect on that? Now, if a person would avoid being paid and then doing the exact same job, independent volunteer, but in essence was doing the exact same things as before, that's not what Mrs. Turchik described. What she described was sort of being her as an independent volunteer in certain roles. Again, it's not that it can't happen. I think that it's that the board, this becomes a difficult thing administratively to consider, and it becomes a walking on eggshells kind of a moment. Who holds that person accountable? If somebody's not comfortable, will they say that? How do we manage that and communicate that? It's just becomes something of concern. So again, as far as weighing in, that's why I'm glad it's being talked about. It's something that should be talked about. In addition to the two policies that Mr. Kashani mentioned, Policy 011 is principles of governance. And one of the components of that is to avoid real or perceived conflict. And there may not be a real conflict of interest, but there may be a perceived. And it might be different even between the two examples that we heard because they're different kind of responsibilities. So it's worth this is discussion. Back in probably 2014-ish, there was some brief, like a blip of discussion about should parents be coaches, right? That comes up from time. Is there a conflict of interest when the parent's the coach? Well, what if the coach has been there for a long time, player eventually moves through the system? But, and again, there's pros and cons to all that. What Misk said was 100% accurate. In many of our sports, we're looking for quality with kids. It's not like we have 475 to choose from. I mean, we're looking to bring good people in. So there's all these competing interests. But 011 talks about avoiding possible perceived conflict. So the question becomes, if the circumstances are, the board will have to help the administration understand and implement, ensure that that those conflicts aren't emerging, and if something happens, how do we deal with that? if Mrs. Turchik ultimately, again, I'm not picking on you, field hockey was mentioned. So if ultimately something were to come before the board around hockey, how do we handle that? I don't know. I mean, those are questions. Would you want to? Would you have to? Would you need? I mean, these are all decisions, and that's the challenge, and that's we've met you the community. Anybody who's listening, I don't know how many. Could be 5, could be nobody, could be 100. In our board training, the idea of hats means resident, spouse hat, parent hat, board member hat, coach hat, community member hat, maybe hat. I mean, everybody on this board is highly engaged in things, and that's a huge positive to this community. Huge positive to board service, huge positive to the students that are in our school, huge positive to our staff. But to provide more explanation of what Dr. Meyer said, the reality is, when seated on the board and they walk into a building, let me tell you, even if you're the parent of Johnny or Susie or Joey, and everybody in that building knows that's a board member. Would it be nice if it wasn't? It isn't. I mean, it just isn't. And so these are all the things that are worth discussion because we want to maximum benefit for our students and community, but we want to avoid potential conflicts that can have a negative effect. And so I don't know, again, like policy 903, I'm not sure there's super clear and bright lines on these stuff. But ultimately that is a discussion for the board.
There's not a clear and bright line on conflict of interest. I mean, there's the potential, there's no doubt, but there is a clear line on it. Is it permissible?
Oh, I didn't say that.
Right. I'm just saying, I want to distinguish between the two. If not going to permit it, then we should change our policies to not permit it.
So,
execution is different than permission.
Agreed. And to your point, to take your step further, there's 1,000 forms of volunteerism. Right? There's the volunteerism where you might be responsible directly for students, directly and alone. Then there's the form of volunteerism where maybe you help with life. Then there's a form of volunteerism where you're in a classroom under the direction of the classroom teaching to 4 students a text. So not all volunteer positions are created equal. So even to echo your point, amplify it, the reality is they're case by case. And it's just, and again, my point would be only to say, this is worth discussion, proactive, so that as we move forward as a district and as the board makes decision votes on certain actions, we've talked about it, we understand the benefits, we understand potential pitfalls, and then frankly, we receive support, implementation if something moves, so that we can do so effectively. Who the person is and what they do and how they do it is going to vary over time.
I think trust is an important piece of that too. I think trust and being able to trust each other is a really, it speaks to judgment. It speaks to the comfort level up in the whole system that people would have with having a board member present. So if the teacher is comfortable having someone in the classroom, if a coach is comfortable having a board member hearing, that lowers a lot of the potential mishap. But if someone's going into that with an ideological purpose, and there's a history of that kind of, that raises the stakes of the perception about what's going on. So it's why trusting is an important thing.
Yeah, and it's fun. You're right. If the coach one of the interesting things about this right now is I wouldn't put them on the spot to bring the coaches of these parents and say, well, what do you guys think? Because I can't expect to get an unfiltered answer. We would our answer in some respect if we were in that position. You can't know. And that just scrapes the surface. What's somewhat problematic about this? The policy not allow employment. There's some question about whether these would be like what they were. And so in the first description, which we got from Mr. what was described was an assistant coach. It literally said assist the head coach. It seemed very similar, and we've since, right, so assistant head coach taking away the pay. That doesn't change, right? The reason legislature doesn't allow board members to be employed is not because of the money, believe it or not, which we all know, right? It's not because, it's because of these inherent conflicts of interest and the contradiction that you introduce when you put a board member at chain of command. That poses, when we join the board, we make choices. Mr. Archick, you had to be aware this would cause you to have to resign your coaching. Mark, you've asked around football, the previous board, and the answer was unambiguously that it would be a bad idea. It would conflict with our principles for governance and leadership. I mean, it still conflicts. You may get a better hearing here for, I think, completely different reasons. Not that the actual circus or ethics of this situation have changed at all. I do trust you, Mark. So that helps, right? I think the problem, particularly to this position, really should be the coaches, not others. Coach Ladon did create a program at Penn Hills. Pine-Richlands will look different, I'm sure, but he is a brand new coach in a sport where we have had severe issues that the public is well aware of with respect to accountability, with respect to chain of command. I don't want to blur it. I want Coach Ladon to understand clearly that he's accountable first to the athletic director, who's then accountable to Mike, et cetera. This gives me concern. Not about your character, or, it creates a blurred line, and it creates a perception. The stories that could be spun in the Twitterverse, the conspiracies that this feeds, and we don't need the right to advocate for our boys and for character development as part of that program, though, I know is a passion for you, so I appreciate that. And I think that's something that's going organically in a way slightly different because Mark's not involved, potentially, but I think it's stronger for that. In field hockey, of course, the involvement is storied. It was there already. But how could it not occur that this would be a sacrifice? The number of sacrifices I've made, I mean, from the beginning, your parent-teacher conference is not the same. Personally, I've opted out because we've found that my apps for a franker discussion. Know that you can't take that board member hat off. I don't have that same trust on it when it comes to you, Mr. Archick. I mean, you guys have asked, I have to say the person matters. I'm not comfortable, getting this detail in person, so option to discuss, because we're discussing a specific personnel matter. This would require board approval to do so in a session, but I will give reasons.
Thank you for that. You are correct. I've been there for 5 years. This would be my 5th year. So I don't think asking the head coach on the spot that because I'm a board member, that would change her opinion. As I said, when I first got on the board, I did check with Mr. Palmer, and I could do it in a volunteer position because I don't, I'm not evaluated and I don't date anybody. And as it is, just
Were
because.
you evaluated as an assistant coach?
Yeah.
How, and you won't be now?
No, I'm not. I'm going to be a volunteer coach.
And the removal of the evaluation just seems convenient, so you can check that box. I mean, this is, and so let me go on, because I wasn't
No,
actually.
that's okay. Let me finish.
I wasn't asking you a question, to be honest. I wanted to adjourn to executive session. If the answer is no, I'll continue.
Does this
Jump
require?
in. I haven't had-
No, you will, Ms. Brusalis.
Mr. Palmer,
I
does
just
this
wanted to ask if
require
you wanted to.
executives about
No, it doesn't.
volunteers?
Before we jump into an executive session.
Right,
I mean,
so let me,
from Mr. Lyons' comment,
Ms. Brusalis, I didn't yield the floor. I just asked Amy to go to executive session. Their answer was no, so I'd like to continue. Thank you.
well, I think she was talking for you, and I don't know.
Well,
if-
No.
Christina, Peter was
No.
talking.
No, sorry.
Let's allow him to fit, and then Christina, you can jump in.
I won't be quick. If there is one person on this board that I have a concern about blurring lines, it would be you, Amy. You've been on the board for a few months. My understanding is you've already intervened in disciplinary proceedings of the district. That is absolutely unheard of for a board member to ever do, as long as I've been here. That is a blind. That is someone who is willfully ignorant of their role as a board member and the
Vice
obligations.
president of the board couldn't attend?
And the obligations that it imposes. When we talk about willful ignorance, and again, I've been the recipient of lots of personal attacks on a lack basis when you question them, so I'm going to offer very specific evidence. And it's uncomfortable. Around accountability, around athletics and accountability, remember most of you, Ms. Turchick, is you picking up the bat for Coach Kasparowicz when you knew nothing of circumstances because it was politically convenient. More, there's silence. That has me lose trust.
This is.
I won't mention. I won't.
But you are talking about the individual. This
I'm
is
talking about.
But you're talking about,
Yeah.
and Amy is not up right now. The question is around volunteership. And the way that I hear you talking about it is that, quite honestly, the positions that you and I have held within booster groups, then, because at that point, we're not directly involved with children, but we're involved with a lot of money that we're directly responsible for.
To be clear, position would come to the board for a vote. These positions?
This would, and
Okay,
and
so-
so does the
right.
so does the approval of a booster group, right?
Right.
So information that we
So there are certain positions, Christine Misbeck never came up for approval while we were on the board. She was approved before she assumed the board. I never came up for approval on lacrosse, on hockey, and this is why.
Not specifically, no.
No, because governance and those are different positions. The attempt to count these positions as just another volunteer is simply not true. No, because we have to approve them.
So
That's how we know, Greg. And that's a big difference. Governance matters. When you were involved with the hockey board, you were accountable through a different system of accountability, not through the district.
Oh, I was.
And-
We were accountable through the district, and that's 915. We
The
were. We
district could
both.
choose, right, and this board could have chosen to approve the hockey boosters.
Correct, and that's so.
So that was the
Here's the
question.
question. More
Isn't the question-
individual for you, and so if it's individual, then the discussion that we're having is me would come up for a vote.
I think the
If-
answer
if
is,
it's-
I think the answer is completely clear because I've said I trust, know, and love Mark, but I can't even approve Mark in this position. So it's both.
Okay, so
So
that,
it's both.
so that's the point.
I think they're both relevant
If,
here.
if they come up for a vote, then if the board agrees that, hey, we would allow this, when it comes up for specific, be the time for those discussions.
Yeah, I want to finish my comments
but
there, Greg.
The
Thank you.
thing about this is the fact that when the question was posed to Dawn, and this was also posed to Dawn outside the board, was, is this an executive session discussion? Is it personnel? And the answer was no. That, to me, kind of also changes that discussion. It changes the discussion whether can it be allowed or not, because it's not a decision, which means they're not technically in the chain of command, if you will. So, and I understand it. It's these dotted lines like we have with hockey and lacrosse. Or
Greg,
had.
your words, you're tying yourself up in knots. They're not in the chain of command. I sure hope Mr. Kashani is accountable to Coach Ladon in this position plated. If he's not, then I have an even bigger problem. If he is a Coach Ladon reports to Joe Durando, reports to Dr. Pasquinelli, and he's in the chain.
But you are accountable to the district. You're accountable to Ms. Kirk, then the athletic office, as the head of the booster organization. Booster organizations fall under 915, which most, not necessarily all, most fall under the athletic. That is clearly in the chain of command,
No,
especially,
so you're
especially as an
confusing-
officer
No.
of that. A member is different.
The organization.
Right.
Is
And
accountable. Who leads that organization is determined by the members of the organization who have their own governance bylaws.
Yes,
So
yes, they do.
So the person
Under the guise of 915.
person doesn't volunteer.
What
which
I'm
is why,
saying
Greg,
is that
Greg,
we would
don't
go,
approve. We don't approve the people who serve on the booster
no, we
groups.
don't.
Groups.
But there's certainly a conflict there.
If you're suggesting that we, then by all means, I'm
No,
pointing
I'm
out the
saying
situation.
that it would be one and the same, in my opinion.
Finish, because I think you're tying yourself up in knots trying to draw an equivalency between this and other service. Let's be clear. I'm being asked, this board will be asked to approve these people in this position. That's, if the board were asked to approve your role in hockey or my role in lacrosse, I would understand. You'd say it's equivalent, and I would wear those same concerns. And as you know, I addressed those proactively. My service was temporary, it was not something I sought, and I let this board know voluntarily when it came to lacrosse. But it was not required, and it is with this. Why is that? Why did the legislature do that? Why can you not simply avoid this by saying, I'm not going to take pay? We who don't take pay before, we approve them, subject to the chain of command boardings. So it matters. It matters. But I have, what I've seen, in particular with Ms. Turchak, is a willingness to ignore facts, spread disinformation.
Again,
So-
again, that is not.
It's relevant.
Well,
Okay,
but
we
that's
get it. You
that's.
Wait.
are not
If
supporting-
you
you're now
make your
engaged
specifically,
But this is,
if you would,
this is
We
what,
know your position.
like
so we
just
need
make
to
your
I
point
asked,
specifically
listen.
to your coaches, not necessarily to the individual. The individual's not up right now. This is a discount how the board as a whole feels about the volunteer of board members, right? Not the specific individuals. So, in general, if I'm hearing you correctly, you have concerns with it, noted. You all concerns because of potential individual conflicts. And it to me, as I've heard you say it, it is not specific because of whether you trust or the board member. You don't like the idea of them being in the position of coach. Am I correct?
Greg,
Without going into
Greg, with all
specifics to an
with
individual.
all due respect, don't interrupt me again.
What, seriously,
all due
with
respect,
all due respect,
don't
you're
interrupt me
off
again.
base, Peter. You're absolutely off. The question before
How
us.
can
the
I not consider the person? This is a person.
Because there could be 100 board members in the future that are up for the same thing. The
And
this
I would
board,
evaluate each of them accordingly.
so let's evaluate them when they come up, or make your push for, I don't think we should even consider it. Majority of the board says, hey, you know what, we think this is a bad idea. We understand I get that. If it's, you know what, I'm okay with it, but it's going to depend on the individual, then when we individual, that's the time to bring these up. I mean, that's the way I see it. That's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing from you, if I didn't mistake, even though you say you trust Mark, you don't like the idea of him in a volunteer position.
Listen, I really don't want to attack anyone personally. I was just giving some factual statements that were made.
That's fine.
That apparently struck a chord.
The question
And I'm
simply
not
is,
sure why, because no one's disputing the facts as I laid them out.
I think we can dispute facts when you're going to say, I spread disinformation and I'm Coach K banner for political
I think it's literally
motivation.
called a banner on Facebook, but it's really, so.
but again,
yeah, you did.
for the purposes of this discussion was talk about board members as volunteer coaches in particular.
So one of them, in general, in general, one of the problems is the board member doesn't understand those lines. You could have a board member who doesn't understand.
So is the
right?
question that we don't allow any, or do we do it specifically?
But that sounds
And
very
Krista, go ahead.
It sounds very subjective and absent of policy. So if you strongly, Peter, then we should be pulling that policy and we should be reviewing it because it sounds really subjective. And you can't say one person might be better and we have to evaluate and another might not be in this particular circumstance because we're talking about board, whether they can or can't. We're not just talking about someone off the street who wants a position, be evaluating them individually. This is a policy of whether or not there should be in volunteer positions. And I would say let's not limit it then to athletics. Talk about whether they should be chaperones on trip because I believe that that is also board. Or I'm sure there are a number of other positions that are board approved that we might have to consider. So either we make a change and stop talking about people's characteristics as whether or not you would them in this instance, but maybe someone else in a different instance might be okay. It's really subjective. If you don't like this, let's take a look at the policy.
Agreed. Good idea.
So if you can't do that now, absent a policy, we have no choice but to move forward with it. So either we pull the policy or we don't.
So So here's another example. I'm sitting here thinking about all of these. We could broadly say, I will never volunteer for a career day again. I'll never to read aloud. But this is categorically different than that. It is categorically different than that. So if you have an outspoken parent who criticizes the board for policies or has an issue with a particular board member, I'm pretty sure that parent is going to perceive a conflict of interest. Because they're in a role where they are working with children not under the supervision of a teacher. They're going to be whatever you do. And, how do we know Coach Ladon wants this? Amy, I don't know your situation, and I respect that. And Mark, you do good work, but just this, and it's also a trust issue, I think, with the community. So I sit on the board, and then I create positions I want? Because this position hasn't existed before. If the coach came to, hey, I want to do this, that's different. Volunteer coach didn't exist before. I know how hard I've given up stuff.
Volunteer coach last year, there's been one every year.
Yeah.
But she didn't sit on the board.
And again, so the question before the board is simply, and Dr. Mihalik, if you'll do this, the question before the board is, do we really go back into those policies and pull them, or are we comfortable with board allowing to be volunteers, even volunteer coaches? I mean, that's really the question before that we've got to address, right? So Dr. McHale.
Thanks, and my comments are in line with that. Why this is difficult. So, for example, Ms. Brusalis would like this to be much more, white, less objective. But if you look at Policy 1.1, Principles of Leadership and Governance, under ACTLE, there is act to avoid actual or perceived conflicts of interest. So that is not a black and white thing. There's a lot of judgment involved in situations like that. And in fact, the guideline is to err on the side of making sure that you don't end up in that place where the ambiguity create the appearance of conflict of interest. So, a lot of guidance is embedded in Policy 011. It doesn't prohibit, volunteering, but it's a judgment call whether that starts to create blurs between perceived or conflict of interest. So, that's why it's not going to be easy for us to hammer out a policy that says no volunteers, because there are ways where people can act and not create a conflict of interest, be beneficial for the district under certain circumstances. So it's why it's a really difficult thing for us to explore.
And that's why I would agree with you, and that's why I would say that that we don't touch the policy and we make those individual calls, right? When somebody comes up, that and this would be me, and if the board is in agreement as a whole, that we allow these as individual when the individual votes come up. That would be my leaning, kind of a nod.
So this will come up for vote next?
Well, not typically. Basically, what I'm seeing,
anytime it
I'm seeing the
happens.
consensus from the
Individual
board
times.
as we sit here to, yes, the individual volunteer coaches could come up, be discussed only in an open forum, because as Mr. Palmer pointed out, an executive session issue, that then those issues would be discussed public, whether there's concerns, whether there's support by board members individually. But it seems the majority of the board at least would say continue and do it specifically on the individual circumstances surrounding that volunteer who's being approved, whether it be her own, whether it be a coach, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm with that, Greg, and I wanted to thank Matt and Carla and Peter. Your race is not easy. It is hard, right? It's hard. But I do like the ability to discuss it on a case-by-case basis for now and the future, because I think it's healthy for us to be able to do that as a community.
All right, let's move to item 8.06.
8.06 is an information item. A staff service governance meeting is scheduled for April 18th, 2022. A staffing update will be provided.
Yep, it's on the calendar. Mrs. Brusalis, if you don't mind, since you're remote, I'll take the operational services.
Thank you, because I'm trying to next to
Yep.
the,
Nope,
I'm having trouble getting to the agenda.
Understood, thank you.
Thank you.
Item 9.01, operational services, is the action items that were listed in consent agenda. Item 9.02, motion to remove the mandatory quarantine from the Pine-Richland Health and Safety Plan effective March 22nd, 2022.
So Greg, just to be clear, we're voting on both of these items, so one mandatory quarantine and one.
Did we get a second?
No, there's no second on this yet.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
So 9.02 has been read and motioned. I'm sorry, no, 901 was the consent agenda discussion. Since there is no second, we will move to item 9.0. Item 9.03 is a motion to approve the removal of tracing and quarantining from the Pine-Richland Health and Safety Plan effective March 2022.
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded. Is discussion?
Yeah, I have a discussion, but I'll wait for the board to speak unless you want me to go first.
Well, I mean, two questions. One was, where's the evidence that this needs to be removed? Like, what problem is this actually? And the second is, what public health and administrative piece is making this as a recommendation, if at all?
Well, could I jump in? I actually think there's some, and I do have at least one. For that, Allegheny County Health Department has ceased contact tracing for those who are 50 and old, or has ceased them for people who are to 49. They continue to contact trace for those over 50 leave, and for those who are 4 and under who haven't been able to vaccinate yet, the old being because they're more vulnerable. That middle ground is no one's tracing, and so that's our main constituency. And we aren't a health agency. It's not our job to contact trace. And if Allegheny County Health Department is not doing it, then what is the impetus for us to continue to do it as well? It's our job, and the Allegheny Health Department is. There's no need for a number of various reasons, but the age group between 49 is not being currently contact traced here in Allegheny County.
You're saying there's no need. Could you show us a statement from Allegheny County Health Department, because we understand quite differently.
I certainly can. If you give me a second, I can send it to the board there now. I think I made.
I mean, this motion was made ad hoc weeks ago. Joe, I didn't get an email from you with any of this in. Why not? Any reason? Christina? Greg?
I made the motion I made the discussion point at the last meeting.
At the last meeting?
At the last meeting. At the last meeting, I made the discussion point that this should be a voting item.
No, and the backing for it, the thought process, the material, the evidence was nothing. No discussion. No one provided to the board whatsoever. Typical. So now we're left with assertions about something that should be relatively clear to this body, this meeting. What is Allegheny County Health Department's public stance on it? That should be something that is not vague and ambiguous body. We can decide what we decide, but what they have made clear, they have made clear. And they are recommending that we continue to do contact tracing, as is the CDC. I'm not sure I completely agree with it, Christina.
Right now, and it's saying universal case investigation and contact tracing are not recommended for COVID-19.
That's something a little bit different.
Is it?
Dr. Justice can speak to that. Okay. We know exactly where you are on the CDC page. Okay. There's another to that page. That's pretty much for healthcare.
Yes, the intent of that is it was intended for healthcare departments to, in the beginning of the pandemic, anytime there was a case, they literally personal phone calls and outreach to individuals who are positive to assist with contact tracing outside of the school setting, et cetera. And now it is not recommend healthcare departments do that unless they're in one of these certain settings where it's like a communal group, right? So it's populations where there's in like nursing or support care facilities, things like that. So that was removed some time ago. The level that Allegheny County is doing the contact tracing on their behalf, they are still requiring us to submit numbers for contact tracing, quarantine, et cetera, to them on a weekly basis. That is while they have said, and we've been in talks, and I believe we mentioned to the board previously that even the leaders there have been talking with the state and advocating, at what point will this be something, and believe it is to be soon. That the timeline is yet not known on that. So it is not to say that contact tracing has been removed by Allegheny County.
I'll just give a couple updates. Okay. All right. So I'm going to start, as I've attempted, to positively. We're seeing a continued decline in the number of cases in Allegheny County. That's a thing. The incidence rate in Allegheny County has dropped for 10 consecutive weeks. And we're at an incidence rate right now in our, if not seen since the end of July 2021. So that's hugely positive. The metrics aren't looking at positivity right now, but positivity less than 5%, which is also a positive. At Pine-Richland specifically, we are averaging less than 1 case per day. Right now, we're at about, well, we are at exactly 0.7 in a rolling average. We've been as low as 0.1, and we've been hovering in less than 1 for a while now. So again, that's an extremely positive thing. That matters because when we talk about contact tracing in schools, what we're talking about is when there is a positive notification of a case that a student or a staff member. So that means that less than 1 per day, we're receiving that information, and nurses are assisting in a process that they have assisted with since, well, for as long as we can remember. There is no in direction or flow chart from the Allegheny County Health Department. We have not received that as the school officials. Most recent call was last Thursday afternoon with Dr. Brink and Allegheny County. The CDC, I definitely get what Mrs. Brusalis was citing that page. It is not clear. So it is confusing information. Some of the challenge with these public health agencies, they've got like web pages. Some of those web pages are updated at different times than other web pages. So trying to keep track of it all is not a simple task. But at this time, CDC, Department of Health, PDE, Allegheny County Health Department have not indicated a change in expectation for us. Again, thankfully, we don't have to do it much because we don't have many positive cases. That's a good thing. It's not a burden to us to do.
I was just reviewing.
I just want to wait for Greg, and then I want to. I'm not done.
Okay,
I just was.
sorry. Okay.
No. So we serve for empathy in the fact that I'm an officer in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I've asked for that empathy throughout the course of the pandemic, and I have done everything I can to read, learn, understand, and ask, because when I make recommendations to the board, that comes with a significant responsibility. There is not a second that I'm awake. I don't feel the responsibility of leadership at Pine-Richland as the superintendent of schools. The hat never comes off. And so this motion as presented would be a motion, and the board can get in and move on it. They can make it, you guys can do it, but it is a motion and it's not consistent with those. And I would appreciate you just somebody saying that clearly, because it's the case. We have a wide range of children in our schools and staff members. The motion not seconded, so 9.02 did not receive, we moved on to 9.03. 9.02 allows us to do what is a relatively simple and efficient process now, which is see if there are any close contacts. But 9.02 would have allowed notification from the school to a family to say, so for example, if Don Palmer's positive, then Mrs. Lyons, Mr. and Mrs. DiTullio get a contact from the school that says, hey, I just want to let you know you were identified as a close contact. 9.02 said, Mr. and Mrs. Lyons, Mr. and Mrs. DiTullio, if you want to keep it at home for quarantine, you can do that. But the decision is yours as long as Peter and Greg are asymptomatic. So the advantage of 9.02, even though it's not signed with the public health guidance, is that nobody knows what's happening in Zor DiTullio houses. They don't know about grandparents. They don't know anything about what's going on in individual families, but it allows the family to make the choice. In this motion, as presented, this is basically saying is I stop everything, which would include telling Mr. and Mrs. Lyons and Mr. and Mrs. Tullio that Don Palmer, we would say his name, but a person was identified positive. That learning at differing levels. For some of our, it's not concerning at all. For some of our families, it's significant concern.
I just wanted to interject, if that's okay. Yeah, I feel right. We've been doing this consistently, and to the point we weren't even notifying people. You know, we have different families in our community, and a lot of them, not everybody agrees with process, and this has gone on for how many months here with Emmett, but I feel like we're getting to a point where the cases are lower, Dr. Miller said, but I probably, as communication director, wouldn't feel right if we didn't at least notify our families. Whatever you decide on the motions is what you do, but I still think communication is key here as we wind down.
And
I
I'd ask
appreciate,
you
go ahead, sorry,
just
Mike.
to consider our staff in the same way in terms of communication. You know, they have come to a point of understanding how that works, appreciate knowing in terms of their own situations and family situations. So staff and families, I'd ask you to please consider that.
Yeah, I was going to ask the question. Know what teachers think about this? Do we know?
Well, so that's a good, I mean, it's a good question.
These motions
What
as worded.
I would say is I'd like to go a step further and then back to your question. So families who, as I said, if would disagree that some families aren't concerned by this information, I want to talk about that. So if you don't agree with me, I'd like back on that. Not asking how people individually feel in homes, but rather that we have 4,600 students, we have a whole lot of families, and we have a lot of circumstances that we don't know about what's going on. Word travels in a variety of ways. So the phone call is going to be to the school nurse, and the school nurse is going to say, instead of the school actively saying, Mr. and Mrs. Lyons, Mr. and Mr. DiTullio, just want to let you know your child was close to somebody who was positive. You have the choice to quarantine or not quarantine. But we wanted to make you aware so that you can make the decision that is best for your family. If not, proactively through the nurse, then they're going to call them and say, was my child a close contact too? I heard that Dawn was a positive case. I know my son or daughter is in class with Dawn, and I'm worried about whether they were contact or not. Can you let me? I mean, this is the reality of things. So what I will say, Mark, to your question is this. Our workforce, which is teachers and secretaries and custodians and paraprofessionals and others, that they have a high level of trust for the manner in which we have governed through the pandemic. When we have operated with intentional effort, collaborative nature, we communications and the rationale for those decisions in a proactive way. When we've done that, we have developed a significant amount of trust. They've in fact had a seat at the table in representative ways and communicate that, just like the board had a representative in some of those discussions. We've done that publicly. Again, we have so few cases. This is such a small matter relative to things stand right now that I would be discouraged to create conflict or chaos where it doesn't exist. Right now, we have 0.7 cases, which means in a given week, we have a few calls that may be made. Right, as of we have 6 students right now in school-based quarantine. With item 9.02, what that practically means is that if those 6 individual students are asymptomatic, then those 6 parents could make the decision to not send, but we would let them know that their child was a close contact. Not all the way at the guidance, but it makes more sense relative to the low number of cases that we have. Now, the way the CDC guidance is on quarantine is that, again, this is a departure from that. It went from 10 to 5, and return after 5, as long as you're asymptomatic, you're masked for those 5. What we've been implementing right now. In this circumstance, 902, it doesn't get to that level of detail. 902, not 903, 902. But if we called Mr. and Mrs. Lyons and Mr. and Mrs. DiTullio about a positive case, we would say, you make the call on quarantine, but they need to return. If you're not going to quarantine, you need to be masked. The reason is because they're contacts, and we know, and nothing has changed, that you can transmit the virus while asymptomatic before becoming symptomatic. So the rationale is that if Mr. and Mrs. DiTullio say, yeah, he's coming, he comes to school unmasked, but he's asymptomatic. Next. And so now he becomes symptomatic. Too late. Now you're calling me to tell me the same thing. So that's the idea behind this. So we've not specifically asked our staff, how comfortable are you? Follow the direction of the CDC, PA Department of Health, PDE, Allegheny County Health Department, arbitrarily remove what's been a practice that's been effective. We didn't ask that. But thus far, they have demonstrated support for our.
Would this have any consequence on the MMOU? This.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think I don't. You know, again, right now we have 0.7 cases. If we remain low, there's not a whole lot we're actually doing. If cases increase, then it has a little bit more of a ripple, and we're at such a different place right now. And there will be a time, I mentioned, Allegheny County is going to change. You know, there's a desire to head in a direction. They're communicating that to PDE and PA Department of Health. So it's coming. The question is whether we need to beat it there and create some of the questions, your potential
I guess
workforce
just
issues.
logically, I'm just thinking through the logic, right? Last time health plan changed, MOU changed, right? So we're essentially changing the health and safety plan again. So if we haven't thought through the impact on the MOU, then we should.
I think the MOU would change, because the MOU is really about how do we make choices, provide families with choices, and how do we deliver that, and what does that look like?
Access to learning.
It would be more of a cult act than it would be a practical one. It would be more of a does the workforce feel engaged in the dialogue, or have they had an opportunity to weigh in and be a part of the, not the decision, but do they have a voice, and have they been included in the discussion? So it's more around, I would say it's more around cultural impact, which matters, but not necessarily an MOU.
Okay.
I was just thinking about the practical example of a family that hears of this and is expecting, if the timeline is invitation tomorrow and we get a phone call to say, because of this, I'm not comfortable with my child now coming in person as they've been doing since the beginning of the year, then back into some of those conversations we'll have to have with families and teachers and movement into virtual. Again, I just don't understand the timing. Like we keep saying, we're not quarantining a lot of kids. We're finding some semblance of, if you normalcy, kids are coming in, some in mask, and that's fine. Many not, fine. Very few are being quarantined. Staff is in a roof teaching and learn. It throws a curveball into teaching and learning like you can't believe. And tomorrow being the day of implementation and being indicate that and ready for learning, I just don't see it.
It's yet another distraction for political purposes. Quite simply, guys, sit back and they're going to revise the guidance, and you'll look good. I say you, I don't know who I'm talking to, because a motion was made that wasn't even seconded. So there's apparent decisions being made by a group on this board that I don't know anything about, right? Because I wanted this one, but somebody else wanted this one. That was all hammered out beforehand, I guess, and we're going with not 3. So that's what I'm speaking to you. I don't know who, but the people who are making these. In case you haven't noticed, you don't have the trust to the community, these medical decisions. When questioned on the facts, it breaks really hard. It breaks down really hard. You can sit back and say, we're going to follow expert guidance. Boy, it seems like it for them to really lift this contact tracing thing. Do you think they'll do it soon, Dr. And we'll talk for 5 minutes. Or we can create as much as possible in the community, bring these 2 motions that were not even fully formed, that are not the way we operate. Once again, I'm saying that. It's still true, it's not the way we operate. It creates anxiety in our workforce, in our students. People come and talk and say, hey, we need to worry about mental health of our students. How is this helping? It's not. It's hurting. Be clear. We have spent 3 months in this reformed board. Tonight, we took motions in the most significant restructuring of all this district that I've seen in a decade. The question from our financial watchdog, Mr. Cassidy? No. Did questions from any of the new board members? No. Have we spent hours and hours in masks and public health policy that is best by experts? Did we spend hours and hours creating anxiety and lack of trust in our community instead? Yes. People will post again tonight. What a crap show the board was. I'm calling out for accountability. I didn't make that. We didn't have no discussion on finance of our role. We didn't waste weeks and hours, and we're wasting our time again on this, when we could sit back and say, we understand, we're at a different phase, the guide evolving. That prepares people for it. It prepares us for it. This is an abrupt warning shot. Let's put it back on the table. Table the motion as it's coming. Wait a few weeks, and the guidance will evolve. And we can avoid wasting a lot of time on something that really is not critical strategic governance of this district.
Was that a, there's no discussion on that. This will just be a roll call vote, Ms. Williams.
So yes.
Yes tables the motion. No allows the motion to go on as originally motioned.
Mr. Cassidy?
No.
Dr. Meyer?
Yes.
Mr. DiTullio?
No.
Mrs. Brusalis?
No.
Mr. Lyon?
Yes.
Dr. Mihalik?
Yes.
Mrs. Hillman?
No.
Mrs. Turchick?
No.
Mr. Kashani?
Yes.
It's 4 to 5 motion. Yes, 5 noes, 4 yeas.
Motion to table fails.
I move to call the question.
Question has been called. Roll call vote, Ms. Williams.
9.03 that we're voting on.
Yes, the original motion of 9.03.
So here's
It's question's been called.
Can I get a?
I'll second.
Oh, they're going to do what they're going to do.
Mr. Lyons?
Yes.
Mr. Kashani?
Call the question. We have to vote, don't we? We need a 2/3 vote first. Yeah. Don't we?
Call the question, you need 2/3, yes.
2/3 or just a majority, like of the board.
2/3.
Wait, okay, so, I'm sorry, what are we voting?
So I assume-
So we're voting on to table. To
voting
call the
again.
question.
If everyone just says yeah, bait,
Yes.
we can do.
So all those in favor to call the question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Opposed? Call the question passes. Now, we are voting on a motion of 903.
Come on, Don, you're so slow.
Let me get back to the original ones. Okay. Okay.
It's crazy.
Ready?
Yes.
Mr. Cass,
Yes.
Mrs. Turchick,
Yes.
Dr. Meyer,
No.
Mr. DiTullio,
Yes.
Mrs. Hillman,
Yes.
Mr. Lyons,
No.
Dr. Mahalik, Mr. Kashani,
No.
Mrs. Brusalis.
Yes.
We have 5 yeses and 4 nos.
Motion passes. 904.
Could we just talk communication briefly? So,
Oh.
communication. So, do you want, how do you want to communicate on this one?
Well, the vote will go.
No, I mean,
I assume.
no, I'm talking, do you want, we can do it. I mean, just communication
Yes.
from me to the,
You want me to do it. So, excuse me, this is a board discussion. Let's just communicate as we normally would.
from the district?
Yes.
Indicate, okay, action and effective immediately. So just in terms of operations, we're going to receive questions, and we're going to have to be able to respond to those. So we'll have to talk, we can talk about, we can collect them, generate a FAQ, and then be able to post an FAQ as it grows. Okay.
Item 9.0, stakeholder survey, an informational item for discussion as attached. And who's taking that?
I can. So we, from our conversation from our lab, took feedback and made modifications to some of the based upon our diversity, equity, and inclusion. As you recall, this is a part of our stakeholder surveys. What we did for the board and community is we put those questions back. So as just a quick reminder, the first question was posed last year in stakeholder surveys. Our recommendation coming out of our work has been to add a question around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have presented those to our different stakeholders. We provided some opportunities last time for the board feedback. Hopefully you see that your feedback was considered and some of those have been modified. We did change some of the language just to increase some clarity, especially with some of the student questions that we had posed. Laid out there for definition of Pine-Richland definition for diversity, inclusion, question 1 and question 2 as they would be posed to each of those different stakeholder groups. Again, just as a reminder, those questions go out, or surveys typically go out later in the spring.
Is there a discussion? On the stakeholder survey, or can I continue? Okay. You're good. Okay. 5 is a reminder of an operational services governance meeting, June 2022, and I believe we also, that'll be at 6 o'clock by a regular school board meeting at 7. Item 10.
Greg, I'm sorry, just before, I just want to make sure on 904. So our intentions are to add those questions to our stakeholder.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. We don't need an official vote on that, do we?
No, it was just information.
Yep.
I just want to make sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Item 10 is a review of the joint governance meeting that was on, this says March 14th, but this was, today is the sustainability, correct? Or am I on the wrong?
Right, so we
Yep.
had the.
Okay,
one on
joint, yeah,
March
the I'm
14th
sorry.
was
So,
lower.
yeah, sorry. So we had the meeting for DEI on March 14th to discuss steps for diversity, equity, inclusion, and we did discuss a lot of policy 832 at that time. And we will be continuing that discussion at the April 4th joint governance meeting. And today, prior to this meeting, we held a joint governance meeting on sustainability. Does anyone want to provide any more? Okay. All right. We're going to move towards item 11, and we're going to go reports. I know that we have 2 reports from board members. I'm going to start with Dr. Mihalik. I'm going to go around, I think, anyone beside Dr. Mihalik and Ms. Hillman who have reported.
Mine's more like a reminder.
Okay.
I'm curious, we haven't heard anything about Prof. Christine used to give us like updates about Prof all the time. So I'm curious what's going on.
Noted. Dr. Mihalik.
An update from the, from Beatty, was there on March 10th for the Joint Operating Committee meeting. This is something we'd be proud of. There was an excellent presentation by Pine-Richland student Graydon Sheldon, who provided his home construction program team's presentation, which won second nationally in a recent competition in Florida. Presentation demonstrated his team's comprehensive plan for building a home, including such as project management, scheduling, construction materials, and budgeting. Heading to the Skills USA program in Hershey, PA, April 6th to 8th, 2022. We as a district should convey how proud we are of this team and thank the faculty at Beatty for training they offer to our students in the Pine-Richland and our northern region community. And then the second thing is time of year when the annual budget's being prepared. There's a minimal change from the 2021-2022 operating budget to the 2022-23 operating budget. Pine-Richland is projected to have a slight increase of just $4,000 for a total of $530,923 from Pine-Richland out of a total budget of $6.5 million for the entire budget, based on a 5-year daily average membership of 62 students from Pine-Richland. And overall cost per student decreased $207 per student based on increasing enrollments at the Career Center.
Thank you.
Matt, is there an open house coming up for Beatty?
I have to check on that.
Okay, I thought it was in March
It
sometime.
wasn't announced at the, so
That's
I
fine.
don't have it on there, but
Okay,
yeah.
thanks.
Great.
Okay.
Give me a second. I think you just.
Well, Mike, as Dr. P is checking, I want to thank Matt for taking the time. I know he's very busy, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Is the 24th. Ms. Hillman with a legislative update.
I wanted to give an update on what happened today with the preparatory school regulations. And I noticed it was just on the local news as well tonight. Last September, we had the governor.
Is your mic on? I don't know if I can
It
hear you
is.
through the mic.
I'll move it closer. Last September, the governor proposed regulations for the charter schools. It addressed several areas of the current charter law. The regulations were voted on today by the IRRC, which is the Regulatory Review Commission. And that's a 5-member panel, and it's 2 members that are appointed by each party's legislative caucus, and the member who's appointed by the governor. Today they voted to pass or approve regulations in a 3-2 vote, which wasn't really a surprise because it went on lines. Some of the proposed regulations in charter schools are funded on an actual cost basis to avoid public school tuition, creating student performance standards, ensuring trustees are subject to state ethics codes, requiring standard management and auditing practices, ensuring non-discriminatory student enrollment fees, The entire document is listed on the IRRC page, or even PSVA or the PA House or Senate, but it is 180 pages, so I'd read a summary instead. So the majorities in both the House and the Senate Education Committees urged IRRC to reject the proposed regulations, and they wanted to retain their ability to make laws in the ledge and not turn that over to a regulatory body like the IRRC. They were also, many of the provisions in the regulation needed more clarification and may end up hurting charter schools and the students attending charter schools. Those in favor said that the new regulations would provide more transparency, accountability for schools, and allow for more uniformity among charter supervisors. So with the passage today, again, it was 3-2. The Assembly could now try to block the new regulations, and they would do so by passing a concurrent disapproving the regulation. That would go to the governor, and it would be subject to a veto, which he likely would. It would go back to the House and could be overturned by 2/3 of each chamber of the House. So I think that the legislature has to come up with the resolution, and then it goes to the full House and Senate for a vote 30 days. So we're looking at least 6 weeks before it could get. So I think it'll probably be a couple months before we see a resolution.
Any questions?
I do look before Mark goes, because it just segues. I know, Lisa, you intended on March 31st, the AAU is sponsoring the legislative forum. Begins at 7. For those who don't want to drive down to Homestead, it is also virtually. We actually have, at this point, all of the legislators who responded are attending in person, although we expect some to attend virtually in the last minute, regardless. But also at 6 p.m., candidates for the AAU board seats to begin. One will address those who are there in person, and anyone who wants to see them speak virtually as well. The board election will take place by and among members of the school districts of the 42 districts in the AAU's area later in April, not necessarily that evening, by mail.
Is that 2 separate links, or is that 1 link? Do you know?
It's almost two
Two,
separate.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, all the emails have been received on already. They're not linked at all. But if you just show up, it'll feel like one big event.
Okay. Mr. Kashani?
So my order was that we opened up nominations for the Pine-Richland Athletic Team last week. I'm on the committee, and nominations will be taken through end of April. And so I just want to make sure that everyone was aware of that, and it didn't get lost in the email shuffle.
Thank you. Dr. Miller?
Thank you. Just a couple of reports. The first one is about implementation of 903. So in a send, we finalized the communication just now that we will send out to students, parents, and staff, basically taking the information from 903, and that'll go to families. We've also sent that specifically in advance to Michelle Schonbachler, Chris Vins, and Susan Duffy. We're aware as soon as we can get that information to them. We do anticipate questions, and so we'll include a Google link within that very brief communication to capture those questions. There are a number of questions that may emerge to which we don't have answers at this point, and one of them would be the decision to switch, as Dr. Pasquinelli indicated. Would somebody want to go who is in person or not, and how does that fit with select and stay relative to you, and what are the implications of that? So I'm not going to waste anyone's time hypotheticals. We just don't know. So we anticipate we will receive questions. To the extent we can answer them, we'll work to do so. but there will be some to which we do not, and then we're going to have to figure that out together. So that's just a brief update on implementation. Shrek, which, Shrek was really great. And again, just to use today's example, if you stood out in the middle of the parking and you turn in 360, right, you're seeing our kids engaged in all sorts of activity, using the spaces around this campus. Same thing is happening in our other schools. It is awesome. It is our mission. The learning that happens outside of the is so critical. Whether it was the book fair and battle that took place at Eden Hall, over a period of weeks, and how people engaged in that work and just so awesome, or the fact that we have soft practicing on the artificial turf, which is the ram cage. At the same time, we have a scrimmage going on, and which are just tons of things happening in our schools. So, it's just incredible. And to look at the commitments, the engagement, the ownership, the maturity, the professionalism is awesome. The Scholastic Arts and Writing Awards occurred. So we had students who earned Gold Key, Silver Key, Honorable Mention. Mr. Riley, Mrs. Marianne Andressi were present. I had a chance to work as well and support the kids. So really, again, a thing for our students. Next, this day, be there. We've got bocce, regional/state, western part of the state championships happening at Clarion University in our team. The university, not the high school. Yeah. So pretty cool. That's been a year of that. And, I can't think of a reflection of inclusive, engaged practices. It was just an incredible experience, and we're so pleased to finally implement that program. So thanks to the sponsors, the coaches, the team for being so. Thank you.
And just real quick, Beatty Open House is the 24th. It starts at 5:15 p.m.
And we do have a billion other student staff recognition things. So April 4th, pack a lunch or a dinner. So we got a lot. Correct, Ms. Hathorn? Yeah.
So any other reports? So I just need to comment on Shrek, because I was going to comment on it as well, but it was just phenomenal. If the ability to watch High School Musical last year, which is High School Musical last time at our house, I was blown away by the way it was done last year, especially with the pandemic and COVID going on at the time, and the way they had to do it through the high school halls. And I said, how are they going to match that? And I went to Shrek, and I got to see Shrek on an evening where it was a lot of folks from St. Barnabas were there. It was an open for a lot of seniors, and I don't know the last time some of those folks may have been out, but it was a joy to watch the crowd. If you didn't see Shrek, find a way to find somebody who has a copy of it. I think some of the it's not able to be broadcast because of
Thank you.
It's one of those shame on you for 6 weeks if you missed it, to use a Mike Langanism. It's phenomenal. There were so many good parts about it that you can't point anything out, but you can't leave either. The stagehands were phenomenal. The orchestra was absoluteless. The timing, the comedy. If you've seen the movies, it was movies, but it was just absolutely phenomenal. So kudos to everyone involved, and the talent within this school. I can't act to save my life, the artistic ability, so I appreciate it when I see it, and it was phenomenal. So thank you. With no more reports, we will move to recognition of visitors. Ms.
We'll go with the online first because we do have one person, then I'll go get the in-person. Mr. Stobener, if you can give Mr. Baxter a call. Oh, it's okay. I'll get it.
Hello.
Hello,
Mr. Baxter? Hi, you're on with the board.
Thank you for taking my call. I do comments about the earlier section where you were speaking about public comment at the board meetings. One, I was disappointed to get the general vibe that it seemed like most board members spoke somewhat dismissive about public comment, that it almost seemed like an inconvenience getting in the way as during a board meeting. If I misinterpreted that, I apologize, but I was disappointed in that, and I just wanted to remind you that if you truly do look at that as an inconvenience, then you've lost your way. I think that as you are elected official representing the community, and I think that the time that individuals take the time to prepare very important speeches is probably one of the most important can do as leaders, which is to listen. Secondly, about the personally directed comments, I don't care what the wording says, but consistent with Mrs. Brusalis, certainly the spirit of this, not allowing personal comments, should only be limited to comments that refer to someone's life, something that has nothing to do with their role as a board director. And certainly we cannot prohibit commented at a specific board director referencing their conduct director, either through their words or actions. There have been many to the past administration where literally any time a board director's name in a speech, they were shut down immediately. And that can't happen. So those words have been abused and misused, and certainly I thought, if I have a problem with something Mr. DiTullio said, certainly I'd like to sit, but I can't have Mr. DiTullio then say, well, it's being personal, I'm going to shut because that's a conflict of interest. And secondly, we've had Mr. Lyons speak of citizens. He spoke of myself tonight, of Mr. Corey, and he spoke of my daughter. And a few months ago, Mr. Lyons spoke disparagingly about Mr. Corey, and certainly the citizens need a chance to speak at the meeting and address Mr. Lyons. So in that role, I'd like to address Mr. Lyons now in his effort to revise history, August 2nd. And I think it's quite shameful, Mr. Lyons, that you are trying to make yourself out to be the good guy when in probably the lowest moment ever in board history, last August 2nd, this board attempted to shut down and shout down a former student who was trying to raise the issue of sexual assault, and that was under your leadership. But yet somehow tonight you took valuable board time to try to as the good guy when nothing could be further from the truth, and you were wholly responsible for the despicable acts. So I just want to say we cannot have board members trying to use valuable board time to try to spin things to make themselves look good. I think that's disgusting and disgraceful. And if anything, we need more to speak up and to call board members out when their individual words and acts.
Mr. Baxter, if you could wrap up your comments, please.
I am all set. Much.
Thank you.
Okay, our in speakers, we have three. The first, Mike Barber.
Mike Barber, Richland Road. I can take the hypothetical out of the situation. We are one of the families that switched from, as my daughter says, human school to fully virtual because I won't tell you the reasons. We have an asthmatic 2-year-old who was in the hospital twice last year. Tubes all in him, in the crib, having to keep him still from ripping them out. So it's in our family to know if his older siblings, who are hopefully will go back to school, if they were exposed. So taking away contact tracing, we've been also telling them we're going back to human school. Numbers are low until we have city come out with, out of nowhere, suggesting that we're going to do away with contact tracing and quarantining. The board leadership shot it down beforehand, so thank you for that heads up, because we've been able to kind of handle and prep our kids who are struggling and miss their friends. We've been prepping them again, like, well, we're not sure now. We're not sure if you're going to be allowed. Miles may not be in the right situation. And so after tonight's vote, we are probably, I don't know, I have to talk to, but one question that I would like to ask immediately is, I don't know what the people that voted to do away with the contact tracing did the least amount of talking. So, I mean, it would have been nice if you guys talked a little bit more about your why. And then number two, can I send my kid to class and say, all right, numbers are low, I like this, parents right, parent choice, right? Numbers are going up. Most kids, we acknowledge it's not going to really affect. But my family is definitely going to, I want to yank my kids out of school because I know that human school is not knocking pay. The teachers are fantastic. The principal's amazing. But the experience is different. We all agree that it's not the same. It's not as good. And I am not a certified teacher. So me trying to fill in that gap has been painful. And thank you, Mr. Cassiani. I know I kind of went too hard last time on you, but thank you for your empathetic vote this week. So I'll let you guys know that I would have liked to hear the people that voted yes, a little bit more of what you had to say of why. And then number two, can I send my kid to school? And then when numbers are getting bad, I want to say, let me pull him or her out. I want them to get the Miss Hoffman. I want them to get those teachers, classmates. It's just different. And so just think about those two questions. You will be here, though, Dr. Miller. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Speaker is Judy Masucci.
I'd like to talk about my name is Judy Masucci. I've been a Pine Township resident for 20 years. I'd like two different things. I'm not comfortable with limiting speaking time to 30 minutes. That's 10 speakers. It punishes those who can't get here early to sign up. For topics, it's just not enough to hear the voice of the community in 10 speakers. It happened to me. I spoke at one of the health and safety meetings, I don't remember what month, November, December, or something like that, maybe January, and allowed to speak at the main meeting because I spoke at the end of the first meeting. There's no meetings, but I was the second name on the list of the second meeting, taken and moved to the end, and then you cut off speakers, and I didn't get to speak. So it has, even though I got there early and I signed up, I was not allowed to speak. So I don't agree with that policy at all. And I am completely distraught by the decision that you made here tonight to not notify families. It's irresponsible, it's selfish, it's political, and you affect my life directly. I am the high person in my family. You have no right to make it so that I don't know if there's been an exposure in my family. You're right. And I will be in touch with Dr. Miller to find out ways that I can be. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Rebecca is our next one.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Hoffman. I live on McLeod Drive, and I did not intend to speak tonight. I came because I wanted to find out more about the agenda item specific about contact tracing. On the agenda, there wasn't really much information to hear the rationale. I sent a letter earlier. I'm not going to. I don't know if the school board members have had a chance to read it yet. It sounds like at least one person did not, because I cited the CDC guide out schools. I said in my letter, the people who don't care to their family was exposed are fortunate. You should count yourselves as lucky that it mattered to your family. It does matter to my family. Second, I wanted to say, yes, cases are low. That's great. I'm thrilled. Allegheny County Health Department briefing noted at the bottom that wastewater sampling an increase. That's an early sign that numbers may start climbing again. One of the things that I asked in my letter was, what's our contingency plan? So we're wiping off, but we don't have any sort of system in place for what if numbers climb again. What, a month from now, we're in a different situation. We've gotten rid of all these mitigations, assuming that okay. What if it's not okay? What's our plan if we have, excuse me, like in the beginning, at this level, this happens, at this level, that happens. Last week, there was an article in the Journal. It is not a resident of this school, but the interpretation it's a study out of South, and it's pre-Omicron. In this study, 85% of SARS-CoV-2 infections were asymptomatic, and index symptom status did not affect the household contact infection rates, a limited role for control measures targeting symptomatic individuals. So that means that it does matter if we know if somebody can't count on only dealing with people who have symptoms. That's why we contact trace. That is why we quarantine people who've been exposed, because they easily become infected and spread to the people in our community without ever even knowing they're sick. That's why they put the mask on. That's why to stay home. The last reason that it matters is because also I cited in my letter that the Omicron wave, milder, but it was huge. It was tremendously huge. Somewhere made it between 1/3 and 1/5 of child deaths from COVID have in the year 2022. In these 3 months, the majority of the children who have been affected by COVID, which is a small number, those families it matters, have died of COVID in this year. And a
Ms.
large
Hoffman, if
number
you
of
could please wrap
children,
up.
a record number of children were hospitalized in 3 or 4 months. That's why it matters. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it.
Since there are no further visitors, this meeting will adjourn and the board will have executive session.